Okay, good morning. Today we'll do the essay, The Spectacle is Vulnerable, Miss World 1970. That is the title of this essay by Laura Mulvey. Laura Mulvey is a British feminist film theorist who was born in 1941. She is currently the professor of film and media studies at the University of London. And she has done a lot of analysis of the technical and psychological organization of the classic Hollywood films. And she has used a lot of illustrations from Alfred Hitchcock to throw light on classic Hollywood films and especially the concept of viewing. Now, Laura Mulvey has spoken about the male gaze. She is one person who propagated that idea. And in feminist theory, the concept of male gaze is the act of depicting women and the world in visual arts and in literature. So that is what you actually mean by male gaze in feminist theory. Now, how do you do that? It is, depicting women and the world in the visual arts and literature from a masculine perspective that would present and represent women as sexual objects for the pleasure of the male viewer. So, what Laura Mulvey has explained is that when you have visual or aesthetic presentations of narrative cinema, the male gaze has three perspectives: that of the man behind the camera, that of the male characters within the film cinematic representations, and that of the spectator gazing on the image. So we need to understand that Laura Mulvey is, she says that, women can also, when women watch movies, women can also be a participator in the male gaze, and she can be a party to her own humiliation, right? So she says that this world in which we live is actually a sexually, you can say, a world of sexual imbalance, where the woman becomes the image and the man becomes the viewer, or you can say the concept of voyeurism, right? The person who has the male gaze, or the person who is looking at the woman from a sexual point of view, right? So that is what Mulvey has dealt with. Now, this particular essay, The Spectacle is Vulnerable, Miss World 1970, is an excerpt from the work Visual and Other Pleasures. And this essay brings in the vital symbolic role of the visual, that is, the role that the visual plays in the cultural field of the present. And she also uses this essay to flag the importance of the visual terrain in how it can how the visual terrain can actually push women to a corner, or a women becomes, or a woman becomes the sexual object through the visual terrain. This is what she's trying to prove here. Now, why Miss World 1970? Now, if you go back to history and you read about Miss World 1970, you will definitely read about something called the 1970 Miss World protests. It was a stage where the women's liberation activists, or the feminine activists, dramatically threw flour bombs, FLOUR, right? Flour bombs onto the stage where the Miss World pageant was going on. And if you watch, there's a movie recently, I think in 2020, titled Misbehavior, which depicts this, or which documents this period of fizzling excitement and this possibility which were marked by the demonstrations. So there were many protesters, two main protesters, Jenny Fortune, Sally Alexander, Joe Robinson. They all believed that, the Miss World contest epitomized everything they believed was wrong. And they felt that while throwing flour bombs or while doing the demonstrations, it was as though they were stopping patriarchy in its tracks, right? So they all believed in revolution back then in 1970, right? So they threw flour bombs, they threw old vegetables at the person who was anchoring the show. It was a person named Bob Hope, right? And they believed, the youngsters, these young women believed that the world could be changed. And they believed that they were the ones who were to change the world, right? So the Miss World 1970. I think the Miss World pageant started in 1950. So this was the 20th edition, Miss World 1970. It was held in the month of November 1970 at the Royal Albert Hall in London, right? And there were around 58 contestants who were competing for this Miss World title, and it was the Miss World Grenada who became Miss World became was the title was backed by Miss Grenada, right? Miss Grenada, Jennifer Hostel, and she won the crown. And there was this first runner-up was from Austria, and the second runner-up was from South Africa. Now, this event was marked by controversy on that particular day, before that, and even after that, because one thing was the contest had two Miss South Africas, one black and one white. So there was a lot of uproar about that. People said that there was discrimination and apartheid, and also they had two Miss South Africa, one South and one I think they had titles like that. So two Miss South Africas were there. One was white and one was black, and I think the black Miss South Africa became the second runner-up. And it was another thing that marked this 1970 Miss World event was that Miss Grenada, who became Miss World, was the first black woman in the history of this pageant to become Miss World. Right till then, no black woman had become Miss World. So, if you watch the footing of this or the footage of this Miss World 1970, you see how Bob Hope is a very good presenter and an anchor, and he gives a very good speech. And the hall is actually filled with people, and there's a lot of laughter. And then all of a sudden, from the gallery, there comes a flower bomb, right? And it comes and falls straight in front of Bob Hope. So he kind of wonders what's happening. For a moment, he's taken aback. Then, you have this bombs coming one after another. The old vegetables and rotten vegetables and flower bombs. It comes, it just comes out of the galleries from different places, right? And the sound, it keeps on echoing across this auditorium, and people are wonderstruck what's happening. So by then the police swing into action, and it's actually funny to see, Bob Hope standing in the middle of the stage giving a speech, and all of a sudden he is kind of covered by flower bombs. So it's like missile attack, missiles of rotten fruit, vegetables, flower bombs. It's an assault. And by then, the moment he tries to dive for cover, you have a group of young women, very young women, who stand up and shout, saying, "We are not ugly, we are not beautiful, we are angry." But by then the police kind of come in, and they take these women out, and they're arrested, and some of them even spend a night in prison. So it was, the grand finale of Miss World. They were waiting, all these 58 contestants were waiting in the wings to be paraded and broadcast live on BBC, right? But and there were almost 100 million people all over the world who had tuned in to see this event, right? And so there's total chaos, and the transmission is also cut because of this chaos. And the event descends into chaos, but the protesters are all very quickly they're arrested and they're escorted out by the police. And many of these young women, they were very happy. Many of them were, in their 20s, early 20s, and I think 2024, very young people in those days, and they were very, very vibrant. So they were kind of they kind of recount the incident after many years. So they said, they were throwing this and they were enjoying themselves, and then the police comes and takes them away. So why did actually the women's liberation movement do this? The reason was they were not happy with the objectification of women, and they wanted to make a dramatic statement against misogyny, right? So there was a kind of similar protest the previous year by the women in America, the American Women's Liberation Movement, when they had thrown brassieres into the dustbin and they had crowned a sheep as Miss Universe, right? So they wanted to do this here. They wanted to kind of copy the movement into Britain. Like what happened in America, they wanted to copy into Britain, right? And they never, late years later when they speak about this event, Sally Alexander, so they always kept on saying, "Do you really need to be crowned Miss World to show that you are beautiful?" It is kind of, it is like that's what Laura Mulvey says. It is, voyeurism. People enjoy watching women, or and even when women watch it, it's like, humiliating yourself. You don't need to be paraded in a swimsuit, or you need not parade yourself, or you need not have a well-formed body to show that you are beautiful. That is not what womanhood is all about. That is not what being pretty is all about. So they wanted to bring home that point. That was what they wanted to show the world, and that is what they tried to do through that demonstration. So this essay that has been prescribed to you is actually the about this spectacle. So the essay is titled "The Spectacle is Vulnerable." They even call the Miss World pageant a spectacle. It is something that is, for the people to view and enjoy. And it is actually, according to Laura Mulvey and the others, it is, it's kind of degrading women. So such things should not happen. So we'll just read the essay and see what it is all about. "The Spectacle is Vulnerable, Miss World 1970. Margarita Jimenez and I wrote the account of the Miss World demonstration in Shrew. Shrew is actually it's a women's London Women's Liberation workshop journal. So each of these people, they used to edit it. We decided to use our very different styles of writing to give the piece two levels. She wrote a first-person account of events, and I wrote an impersonal comment on her action. The piece was, of course, discussed with the stable group, with the whole group, collectively edited and published anonymously." So this is what she says. It was written in two parts. Continue with the essay. "The Miss World competition is not an erotic exhibition. It is a public celebration of the traditional female road to success. The Albert Hall on the evening of 20 November was miles away from the underground world of pornography. The atmosphere was emphatically respectable, enlivened by a contrived attempt at glamour in quotes. The conventionality of the girls' lives and the ordinariness of their aspirations." Miss Grenada, that who became Miss World, she said, "Now I'm looking for the ideal man to marry," was the keynote of all the pre and post competition publicity. If you remember the essay we did last week, the problem that has no name, women were just focusing on marriage because that is what they felt their lives were to be. So even the woman who became Miss World, Miss Grenada, she said, "I am looking for the ideal man to marry." See, for her, the end of this was marriage, because she thought, or she believed, that settling down as a wife and mother was the best thing that could happen to her. Their condition is a condition of all women, born to be defined by their physical attributes, born to give birth, or if born pretty, born lucky, a condition which makes it possible and acceptable within the bourgeois ethic for girls to parade silent and smiling, to be judged on the merits of their figures and faces. Right? So she quotes from Bob Hope, who was the anchor. "Pretty girls don't have those problems. That is the problems that plain girls have in finding a husband or making a successful career. Women's liberation girls must be plain, because only plain girls would have an interest in attacking the system." So according to Laura Mulvey, she says I cannot call Miss World competition an erotic exhibition, because it's always kind of publicly celebrated as publicly celebrated as the glory of the traditional female road to success. Even the women who were on stage that day were the conventional girls, or the conventional ordinary girls. The ordinariness of their aspirations stood out. And even, the condition of all women, right? If like to be defined by a physical attribute, that is the condition of all women. You are defined by your physical attributes. You are kind of born to give birth, or if you're born pretty, all these things do come into or do actually matter. And that is what Bob Hope was saying, that pretty girls don't have a problem. They don't have a problem in finding husbands or making a successful career. So according to Laura Mulvey, she's quite ironic when she says that, it's women, the people feel that girls who become part of this women's liberation movement are plain girls, because only plain girls would have an interest in attacking the system. Continue with the essay. Demonstrating against Miss World, women's liberation struck a blow against this narrow destiny, against the physical confines of the way women are seen and the way they fit into society. She says, we try to attack the system because this is not what women are. Women are not born to be pretty. Women are not born to have hourglass figures, because, that is not what womanhood is all about, right? So we decided to demonstrate against the physical confines of the way women are seen. Most of all, it was a blow against the passivity, not only the enforced passivity of the girls on the stage, but the passivity that we all felt in ourselves. She felt that all the girls, the 58 contestants who were part of this Miss World competition, were passive girls. And we all women become passive. So she said this women's liberation attack was actually a blow against the passivity which almost all women felt in themselves. We were dominating while preparing for the demonstration by terror at what we were about to do. So when they were getting ready for this attack or for this protest, many of them were very scared because they did not know, what would happen. To take violent action, interrupting a carefully ordered spectacle. That's very interesting, the way they call Miss World, the pageant, a spectacle, right? A spectacle means something that, creates erotic feelings in the minds of others. So to call it as a spectacle itself, it's kind of degrading the movement, right? So it's like degrading the movement, when you say it's such a huge pageant, and people actually come and watch it. And all of a sudden, when you say it's a spectacle, it is, people actually feel, it's actually degrading it. It's degrading the pageant that is there, right? So it's something that's on display. Women who are on display, right? So that is what she says here when she uses the word spectacle, right? So here let's continue with the essay. She says, to take violent action, interrupting a carefully ordered spectacle, drawing attention to ourselves, inviting the hostility of thousands of people, was something that we all had previously thought to be personally impossible for us, inhibited both by our conditioning as women and our acceptance of bourgeois norms of correct behavior. They said they were all very scared. They did not know, it was going to be a violent action. It would be interrupting something that was very ordered. It would draw attention to themselves. It would invite the hostility of so many people. And they all thought, it would be impossible to do it because, they always felt inhibited by the conditioning that they had received as women, the way women are conditioned to think, the way women are conditioned to act. And they were always taught that there is something called correct behavior or proper behavior, prompt behavior. So they were scared of breaking the norms of correct behavior. It was also a revolt against the new safeness of our lives inside the women's liberation, the comfort of continual contact with like-minded people. The fact of joining women's liberation or WL shows a level of awareness of women's condition. So, we always wanted to revolt against the safeness that we felt. We didn't want to be safe, right? We wanted to let people know that we were ready to take risks. But it was also possible within the movement to become sheltered by support and understanding of a group and or friends. So, many of them, when they joined the women's liberation movement, they always felt sheltered. There was a common group of people. There were people who had like-minded ideologies. So many of them, or most of them, felt very sheltered. And they actually wanted to revolt against the shelter. They did not form this women's liberation movement to feel safe or sheltered. They had to revolt. They had to revolt. They had to make changes. If you needed to make changes in society, you would definitely would have to take risks. In the Albert Hall, we were back in the previous isolation of the outside world, surrounded by people, excuse me, one second. Yeah, we were surrounded by people, men and women, who were there to participate in women's oppression and who were outraged and bewildered by a challenge to it. So in the Albert Hall, they were they came out of their comfort zones from the group of like-minded people that they came back, or they left that, and they came into a world that was surrounded by men and women who were not there to be with them, but they were, they were supporting the pageant, and they were not at all happy with the way we were going to challenge it, right? So they were party to women's, according to these women's liberation movement women. The men and women who came to participate or who came to view the spectacle were men and women who were party to women's oppression, right? When you go and view something like this, they believe that you are actually encouraging women to be oppressed. And they also understood, the WL women, or the women's liberation women, understood that when they attack the system, people would be definitely angry and outraged. The outside world is mystified and consequently often hostile, but WL, women's liberation, cannot for that reason fear communication with it. Women must be confident enough to challenge the distortion or indifference of the press and transcend their own feelings of vulnerability. See, what they feel is, when you embark on a mission like this, the world will not understand you. And sometimes they'll be very hostile to you. But you cannot stop communication with them. You cannot be afraid to communicate. You must be confident. You have to challenge whatever is happening to women, or whatever women are being subjected to. If you feel it's wrong, if you feel it's distorted, if you feel it is not right, you should be confident enough to challenge even the press, right? You should come out of your feelings of vulnerability. You might feel afraid, but you need to come out of that. The seating arrangements in Albert Hall were completely different from what we had anticipated. For example, Sally Alexander, right? Sally and I found ourselves unexpectedly isolated at the other side of the hall from most of the others. We had only managed to fill the 2 extra seats at the last moment. Laura found herself downstairs instead of upstairs, So as we read earlier, this event, the first person account is given by Margarita Jimenez, right? So she says when they entered Albert Hall, the seating arrangement was very different. So Sally Alexander and she found themselves unexpectedly isolated from each other, and they managed to find 2 extra seats at the last moment. And Laura was supposed to be upstairs, but she found herself downstairs, Laura Mulvey. We had reduced our grandiose plans to the simplest strategy of aiming for the jury and the stage with a comic array of weapons with which we were armed. So they decided to attack the stage and also the jury. You remember the weapons that I had told you: flour bombs, rotten vegetables, and fruits. Right? We got into the hall amazingly easy. We had thought, with what the young liberals' propaganda, the bomb scare, and strict security, that a group of unescorted girls would never be allowed in. Then, initially, as I told you earlier, there was some kind of protest before this, mainly because of women's liberation was there to a certain extent, but beyond that, it was the racial discrimination aspect, having 2 Miss South Africas and all. So, they really thought that, and especially, when the women's liberation movement was also raising their voices against this, that they never thought that they would be able to enter the hall very easily. But even before this event, there was a bomb scare. So they never thought they would be able to enter easily. But what happens is they were allowed to enter without any problem. They were unescorted and they entered. Once seated, Sally and I realized that the hall itself wasn't nearly as vast as our heightened imaginations had led us to believe. So they had initially thought that the Albert Hall, was too big. But it wasn't as big as they had imagined. Above all, we saw how ludicrously accessible the stage was, and that with the lights on throughout the show, the bouncers right behind us, our only possible plan could be to make for the stage. So, the lights were on, The police were behind them, and the stage was very accessible. So they really thought, make straight for the stage. Our feelings ranged from complicity with the audience, a mixture of people backing their own national candidates, to overdressed couples on a night out and the odd family outing, mixed with an intense feeling that we stood out and that everyone was staring at us. So the people who were sitting there, they were a mixture of people. One is like a set of people who were supporting their national candidate. Then you had overdressed couples. Then you had this odd family. So these women felt that they were standing out, or they were kind of, they stood out, and they were very conspicuous, and that people were looking at us. Conspiratorially, we had not acknowledged each other in the ladies in the bar during the intermission. So they just ignored each other. They just pretended that they did not know each other. So, that was actually a conspiracy. They did not want to draw attention to themselves, right? It was an act of silent solidarity. They did not kind of acknowledge each other when they met each other in the bar during the intermission or during the interval. Mostly it was a feeling of being caged in, trapped in an absurd pantomime, surrounded by superficially nice but basically hostile thousands. It was a kind of absurd show. They felt quite out of place. People were very nice, nice, but they were very hostile, right? So, they felt, people were hostile because they were supporting the candidates on the stage. So, why did they actually feel that the audience was hostile? The main reason was the people who were in the hall watching this event were in solidarity with the event. And the WL women, or the people who belong to the women's liberation, they were not at all happy with the way women were paraded and women were being, like, it was a spectacle, as though women were put on display. They were not happy. They could not accept it. So they were not able to accept the idea that men and women sat in the audience and they were clapping hands to this public display of womanhood. In the hall, Sally's and my conversation fluctuated wildly between frantically whispered consultations and mutual encouragement and overloud comments about the show. The judges, the girls, anything ordinary and unsuspicious. So they kept on whispering to each other. And they were talking about, they were encouraging each other, and they were just talking about the show, the judges, and anything very unsuspicious. They did not want to draw attention to themselves. We tried our best to laugh at Bob Hope's jokes in a pathetic attempt to feel one with the audience at last. Bob Hope was the anchor for that night. He was trying to make a crack lot of jokes, and they tried to laugh. Why? Because they did not want to draw attention to themselves. They did not want the audience to feel that these people were not actually with the crowd, right? But as his jokes fell flat and left the audience cold, we were even isolated in our efforts at normality. Suddenly, the signal which we had been waiting for so anxiously came at the perfect moment. It was a robot like response which surprised us most of all. When the moment came, it was easier to act than to consider. In the scuffle with the police, it was anger and determination that prevailed. As I was lifted bodily out of the hall, 3 Miss Worlds came running up to me, a trio of sequined, perfumed visions saying, "Are you all right? Let her go." Right? So this is Margarita, right? So, she says the signal came, and then all of a sudden, we started throwing the rotten vegetables and fruits, and some of them jumped onto the stage and they started throwing flour bombs and bombs, and Bob Hope was flabbergasted. He was wondering what is happening. And all of a sudden, many of them jumped onto the stage. But the police or the bouncers acted immediately. They also came because they knew something like this would happen. They were also ready. And, they lifted these women bodily out of the hall. And then, these Miss Worlds, the candidates, they came running and they said, "Okay, let her go, because they did not want to create an issue. And they felt that these women were trying to support them. And, these Miss World candidates, they did not want to cut a sorry figure before the audience. So they wanted to act, also goody, and we are caring and all that kind of attitude they wanted to portray before the world, because they knew the whole thing was being covered by BBC, but they did not know that the transmission had been cut. When the policeman explained that we were from women's liberation and demonstrating against them, I managed to say that we weren't against them, we were for them, but against Mecca and their exploitation. Come on, Miss Venezuela, we are on, and the trio disappeared down the corridor. So, what happened is the policeman told these three candidates, see, these girls are from women's liberation and we are demonstrating against them. And so, you know what Margareta managed to say? See, we're not against you. We are actually for you. We don't like this public display. Womanhood is not about public display, or the essence of a woman or the substance of a woman is not in her physical attributes. They wanted to say that. She said, she wanted to, Margareta wanted to tell these women, see, we are against the exploitation that you are being subjected to, right? Against Mecca. Mecca means the kind of you can say the institution that was supporting them, right? So then when these three girls heard from the policemen, they just walked off. They just walked off. Then I was dragged off and taken to a room where, to my relief, I saw that Sally and the two girls who gave the signal had already been detained. So they were kept there. So she was dragged off and she was taken to a room, and Sally was there, Sally Alexander, one of the main protesters, and the two other girls who had given the signal, they were there. How was it, with so many odds against us, that the demonstration was successful? They considered this demonstration successful. They were able to disrupt such a planned event. The spectacle is vulnerable. She says, we were able to disrupt this display. This spectacle is actually vulnerable. There are cracks through which you can actually go in and spoil it. However intricately planned it is, a handful of people can disrupt it and cause chaos in a seemingly impenetrable organization. It seems to be impenetrable, but it has got its chinks, and you can actually wiggle in through these chinks and destroy the entire organized spectacle. The spectacle isn't prepared for anything other than passive spectators. There's nobody who came to kind of stop these women except the police, because they were doing their duty. Bob Hope made more connections than we had ever expected to put across. His continual emphasis on Vietnam revealed the arrogance of imperialism behind the supposedly reassuring family of nations facade. The press, searching for sensation, turned a small demonstration into headline news. Let's leave the last words of Bob Hope. They said we were using women, using in quotes. I always thought we were using them right, and I don't want to change position with them. Why do they want to change position with me? I don't want to have babies. I am too busy. See, that's what Laura Mulvey says. The whole thing they tried to disrupt, and they were able to disrupt, right? But the Bob Hope, he made some other political comments, and he tried to move the focus away from this demonstration onto some other things. He started speaking about Vietnam, and he started speaking about family of nations and all. So he tried to draw attention to something else, to draw attention of this demonstration, right? And the press, they brought it into the headlines, right? They always want sensation. So they made this small demonstration into headline news. And what Mulvey says in the end is, Bob Hope's words. She says, Bob Hope, he said that we were using women. Bob Hope told the world that the women's liberation people, or the demonstrators, said that we, the Miss World organizers, were using women. But see, we are using them right. I don't want to change position with them. Why do they want to change position with me? I don't want to have babies. I'm too busy. See, you see his mind frame. He says, we are not using them, women. We are always using them right. What is the meaning of this word use? Women cannot be used. Women are human beings like men. And Bob Hope says, see, I am too busy. Women are not busy, right? So that is why they have babies. And I don't want to have babies because I am too busy. So he was being pakka male chauvinist there. See, this is what the demonstrators were protesting against. They felt that women were put on display, and it was the male gaze that was being encouraged. And they always felt that women were being displayed as people who were not busy. So having babies and having doing the things was something, or getting married, having babies, looking after house was something which women were supposed to do. It was something which did not have any business in that. That is why Bob Hope says, I don't want to have babies. I'm too busy, right? If you're not busy, you can have babies. So that is the kind of attitude that people had against women. And that is the kind of attitude which these women liberation demonstrators wanted to break. And that is why they tried to disrupt this Miss World pageant. They called it a spectacle because they felt that it had to be, you had to kind of tear it to shreds. They couldn't do that, but to a certain extent, they managed to prove a point. And that is what Laura Mulvey is trying to prove through this essay. She's trying to give an account of what happened in 1970. Right, during the Miss World pageant in Albert Hall in London. So women are, even today, we always feel, especially these beauty pageants, they always try to portray women as perfect. You have something called Miss Perfect 10. That is not the essence of a woman. That is not what womanhood is all about. That is not the substance of women. It is not your physical attributes alone. Right? But I always feel, or people always understand that, we know that even all these beauty pageants, they focus mainly on the physical attributes. Okay, to that they might add your you might say talent and your way of speaking and all that stuff. How composed you are, how courageous you are, how resourceful you are. They might ask you a few stupid dumb questions, right? What is the essence of women and all that stuff. But beyond that, it's basically a I would say it's a something to judge women based on their physical qualities. And suppose you're not born 5'7" or 5'8", suppose you do not have a flawless skin, suppose you do not have a perfect figure, does that define you as a woman without substance, or does that show that you don't have the essence of womanhood? So that was what women's liberation demonstrators were trying to destroy. They wanted to destroy that image. Women are not to be paraded. Even today that happens. But today also nobody's bothered much about it, right? We have maybe one or two women who would speak out against it. But mostly, we have so many followers for all these beauty pageants. Right? So that is what Laura Mulvey speaks in this essay. That why did they try to disrupt the 1970 Miss World competition held in London? Any questions? If no questions, you can just go through the lesson once again. If you have any questions, you can come back to me. If you don't have any questions, thank you very much.